The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and nervous sweat. Jayla Monroe sat rigid in the defendant's chair, her hands folded in her lap so tightly the knuckles had turned white. She didn't speak. Not yet. The room was already humming with the unspoken message. Black girl, big attitude. Here we go again. Judge Catherine Elderson's gavel hit the desk with mechanical precision. Her robe billowed slightly as she leaned forward, peering over her glasses like a hawk sighting prey. "Miss Monroe, do you know why you're here today?" she asked, voice cold and clipped. Jayla nodded once, barely. "Yes, ma'am." "Then speak up. You're 17, old enough to use your words." Jayla lifted her chin. "My foster mother said I attacked her." "She reported," Elderson corrected, "that you shoved her, screamed obscenities, and threatened her with a kitchen knife." Sandra Crenshaw sat 2 rows behind, flanked by a well-dressed caseworker who looked everywhere but Jayla's face. Sandra dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though her eyeliner remained perfectly intact. Jayla's voice was flat. "I didn't." Elderson gave a small, theatrical sigh. "You didn't? Then explain the bruises on her arm, the broken dishes?" Jayla's fingers twitched. "She threw the dishes. I was packing my things. I told her I wanted out." A pause. Elderson smirked. Barely, but it was there. A twitch at the corner of her lip. "So your response to conflict is to run, or throw tantrums?" Jayla's face flushed. She looked toward the caseworker, Ms. Timble, who kept fiddling with her file, not a word of defense. "She locks the bathroom door at night," Jayla said, trying to keep her voice even. "She took the doorknob off my room, said she didn't want me sneaking around." The judge's eyebrows lifted. "And you reported this?" "I tried." "To who?" "I left voicemails," Jayla whispered. "Voicemails," Elderson repeated with mock reverence. "Well, that's airtight, isn't it?" Laughter flickered from the back of the courtroom. Just a chuckle, stifled quickly. But Jayla heard it, felt it like gravel in her throat. Sandra clutched her purse. "I tried my best with her, Your Honor, but Jayla has deep-seated anger issues. You've seen her file, 5 placements, 1 suspension for fighting, and now this. I just worry for my children." Jayla stiffened. "I don't want her criminalized," Sandra went on, eyes wide with concern. "But she needs structure, help, maybe even containment." Elderson nodded slowly, pen tapping against her legal pad. "I've seen this pattern before: rebellious behavior, escalating defiance, and a refusal to take accountability." Jayla opened her mouth, closed it. Her voice was still inside her somewhere, pounding its fists on the door. Elderson turned to the bailiff. "We're going to evaluate placement in a temporary juvenile facility pending psychological review." The words dropped like cold iron. The courtroom began to move, quietly, orderly, like everyone already expected this. Like this was just what happened to girls like her. Jayla stood without being told. Her face was unreadable now, not because she didn't feel, but because she'd learned, years ago, not to let them see. As the bailiff approached, the door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. A figure stepped through. Tall, dark-skinned, lean, steady build. He walked with purpose, not speed, eyes scanning the room until they landed on her, and stayed. Jayla stared. The courtroom, which had already begun to shuffle forward, paused mid-breath. Elijah Watts cleared his throat. "Excuse me." Judge Elderson didn't look up at first. "This is a closed—" "I'm her father," he said. The silence that followed was absolute. Jayla didn't blink. Her eyes locked on his. Elderson glanced up sus. "Harpley, I beg your—" "I said," Elijah repeated, calm and steady. "I'm her father, Elijah Watts. I have proof of paternity, DNA test, notarized, letters from her parole officers. I've filed for custody, ma'am. I wasn't given notice of this hearing." A faint crack opened in Elderson's voice. "You were incarcerated." "Yes, ma'am, for a non-violent offense. I've served my time, and I've been trying to reach her for the past 2 years." Jayla's legs were trembling, not from fear, from something more dangerous. Hope. Elderson narrowed her eyes. This doesn't change the issue before the court. But nobody moved. Not the bailiff. Not the caseworker. Not Jayla. Elijah walked forward, placing a manila envelope on the judge's bench, with a calm that felt louder than a scream. He looked at Jayla. She looked back. And everything changed. The silence in the courtroom was now thick enough to press against. Elijah didn't sit. He stood between the benches and the judge's bench, hands relaxed at his sides, not clenched, but still. His gaze remained fixed on Jayla, and hers on him. She looked smaller now, not because she shrank, but because something inside her, something heavy, had uncoiled. Elderson stared at the envelope like it had teeth. "You will sit down, Mr. Watts," she said coolly, gesturing to the back. "This court session is in progress." "I understand that," Elijah replied, his voice quiet but deliberate. "But your session's about my daughter. I won't sit while she's being railroaded." A soft murmur ran through the gallery. Elderson glanced sharply around, and the room fell still again. Sandra Crenshaw's posture tightened, her lips pinched into a line as she leaned toward the caseworker. "He can't just walk in here like that. There's a process. He's not on the file." "He is now," Elijah said, not taking his eyes off the judge. "Filed 3 days ago. Office of Family Services. DNA. Confirmed 2 weeks before that. My name is Elijah Watts. I did my time. I've held 2 jobs since. I've passed every supervised check-in. I passed every test. I earned the right to speak." Elderson exhaled sharply. "Even if your claim is legitimate, you're not listed as legal guardian." "And she's not a criminal," Elijah said, nodding toward Jayla. "You keep talking like she is, but you're not listening. She's a child." Jayla's head turned slightly. No one had said that word, child, like that. Not in years. Not with softness. Elderson's expression hardened. "This is not your courtroom. I will not be lectured by a man with a record." That did it. Elijah's eyes snapped to her with quiet fire. "And I won't watch my daughter be shamed by someone who's supposed to protect her." The room shifted again, small, subtle. The bailiff looked down. A clerk bit her cheek. Even the fluorescent hum seemed to buzz louder. Jayla's legs moved before her mind caught up. She stepped away from the defense table. "Elijah," she said. Not Dad, not yet. Just his name, like a question and a memory braided into one. He turned fully to her now. "I didn't shove her," Jayla said. Her voice shook at the edges but didn't break. "She kept threatening to call the cops. I was scared. I said I wanted to leave. I didn't touch her. I didn't threaten anybody." Elderson began to say something, but Elijah raised his hand, not with disrespect, but insistence. "She's telling the truth," he said. "I know because she always does, even when it costs her. She wrote me letters from 3 different homes. Some never made it through, but when I did get them, they were full of hope. Still, after everything." Jayla blinked once. A single tear tracked slowly down her cheek, and she let it. "I missed most of her life," Elijah continued. "Not because I wanted to, because the system moves fast when you're black and poor. They took her from her mother while I was locked up. They never told me where she went. I found her the hard way, and I've been fighting in silence. Until today." He turned back to the judge. "This might not be my courtroom, Your Honor. But it's my child, and I won't be quiet anymore." The gallery sat frozen. Elderson stared at him, stone-faced, tight-lipped, but her hands curled under the bench now. The pen no longer tapped. Her usual poise had fractured, only slightly, but enough for anyone really watching to see it. She looked at Jayla, as if for the first time. The judge's gaze scanned her face, saw the streak of the tear, saw the defiance burning just under her grief. "This is highly irregular," she murmured, more to herself than anyone. Sandra stood abruptly. "He's not stable. This is manipulation. I've sacrificed for this girl and—" "You locked her bedroom door," Elijah said without looking at her. "What were you protecting her from?" Sandra faltered. She looked to Ms. Timble for backup, but the caseworker only shifted uncomfortably. Elderson's eyes flicked between the manila envelope, Jayla, and Elijah. Her world had tilted, and she was scrambling to regain footing. But in the middle of it all, Jayla stepped forward. Not to plead, not to beg, just to speak. I don't need another placement, she said. I need to go home. Or at least, start building one. And I don't want to do that in a detention center. Her voice didn't shake now. I want to live with him, she said, eyes shining. Even if it's hard, even if it takes time. No one said anything for a moment. Even the judge seemed unsure of how to proceed. But everyone in the room could feel it. The balance was shifting. The bailiff stood still, his broad frame casting a long shadow beside Jayla. But his eyes weren't on her, they were on Judge Elderson, watching for cues, waiting to move. But no order came. Not right away. Elderson tapped the file in front of her, then the envelope. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not like this. Her face, trained to stay unreadable, faltered for a second. The courtroom waited with her. Mr. Watts, she said at last, the edge of control tightening in her throat. Your documentation will be reviewed by the Office of Family Services. Until then, no, Jayla said quietly. The room seemed to inhale. I'm not going back with her, she continued. And I'm not going to a cell because I made someone uncomfortable. Sandra gave a sharp laugh. Uncomfortable? You're impossible. You're ungrateful. I gave you structure. Jayla turned slowly, like she was turning away from something old and cracked. You called me a stray when your friends came over, she said, voice cold now. You said I was another mouth and made me eat in the kitchen alone. Eyes turned toward Sandra. She opened her mouth. Shut it. Her mask began to slip. I bought you clothes, she snapped. You want to live with a felon? Go ahead. I want to live with someone who sees me, Jayla replied. Not just what's written in a case file. Ms. Timble finally rose from her chair, as if the moral weight in the room had grown too heavy. She stepped forward, clearing her throat. Your Honor, she said hesitantly, I did receive a notification of Mr. Watts's petition, but it hadn't been processed into today's hearing yet. It checks out. The DNA. The paperwork. His records clean post-release, and... She hesitated, then continued. His parole officer did submit a positive review. Multiple, actually. Elderson's lip twitched. I was not made aware of that, she said sharply. That's our fault, Ms. Timble admitted. Our system's still transitioning to digital. Some files lag. It wasn't malicious. That word, malicious, hung in the air like a veiled accusation. Elderson bristled. Sandra looked stunned. Her eyes darted around, as if searching for someone to come to her rescue. No one did. Jayla stood beside Elijah now, close but not touching. I'm not perfect, she said, eyes locked on the judge. I've messed up, but I've survived more homes than you've probably driven past. And I'm still here, still standing. Elijah reached for her hand. She let him take it. I don't want revenge, she added, glancing once at Sandra. I just want peace. And maybe a fresh start. The judge exhaled. She glanced toward the clerk, who was frozen in place, fingers hovering over the keys. Then she looked back at Elijah and Jayla. Her voice was brittle now. This is not how courtroom proceedings are meant to be conducted. I know, Elijah said softly. But maybe it's how this one needed to be. Another pause. Then Elderson did something nobody expected. She leaned back, and didn't say anything for nearly 10 seconds. When she finally spoke, the words were tight, but different. I will file a temporary stay on today's placement order, she said. Pending expedited review of Mr. Watts's custody petition. Miss Monroe will remain in state care, but not in juvenile detention. Jayla's knees nearly gave out from the relief, but she gripped Elijah's hand tighter. I'll stay with a friend, Ms. Timble offered quickly. Neutral environment. Somewhere safe. Somewhere she chooses. Jayla looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Thank you, she whispered. Elderson cleared her throat. I expect formal updates from both legal representatives within 48 hours. And Miss Crenshaw. Her eyes slid to Sandra, whose face had gone pale. I suggest you reconsider your approach to caregiving before filing further claims. Sandra's jaw clenched. But You're dismissed, the judge said. For a moment, it looked like Sandra might erupt. But the room was no longer hers. She grabbed her purse and stalked out without another word. Jayla turned to Elijah, eyes filling now, not with panic, not with rage, but with something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Safety. "I thought you weren't coming," she said, voice trembling. "I never stopped trying," he said. "I was late, but I ain't gone." And for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. The waiting room outside the courtroom was mostly empty now. The storm had passed, but the air still felt electric, like something fragile had cracked open and was letting in new light. Jayla sat beside Elijah on the long vinyl bench, her knees bouncing slightly. She clutched a styrofoam cup of water, untouched. Elijah sat with his elbows on his knees, hands clasped together, eyes on the floor. Neither of them spoke for a while. The hallway echoed with distant footsteps, murmured voices, the rustle of case files. "Didn't think you'd know what I looked like," he said finally, without lifting his head. Jayla glanced at him. "I didn't." He looked up at her then, slow, searching. "But you said my name." "I used to write it on the back of notebooks," she said, "even when I hated you." That got a small chuckle from him, rough around the edges, but real. Jayla bit her lip. "I didn't know you were trying. Nobody ever told me." "I know." His jaw flexed. "They didn't want me near you. I wasn't the right kind of father." Jayla turned the cup in her hands, the plastic creaking softly. "You really clean now?" "Yeah." He rubbed a hand over his mouth. "Hurt like hell to get here. But yeah." She nodded. It wasn't everything, but it was more than she'd ever gotten. A door opened down the hall, and Ms. Timble approached with a clipboard and her usual overstuffed purse. Her heels clicked softly on the linoleum. "I got clearance for you to stay at a transitional placement center just outside the city," she said gently. "It's not a detention facility, no bars, more like an apartment setting. You'd have your own room. Counselors on site. Temporary, just until the custody review comes through." Jayla nodded, slow and guarded. "And he can visit." Ms. Timble smiled softly. "He'll be on the list. First name." Elijah exhaled like he hadn't breathed in 10 minutes. "They've already fast-tracked your case," she added. "Your paperwork," she glanced at Elijah. "It was solid and rare. A father actually prepared. That matters." Elijah shrugged. "Didn't have the right to be sloppy." Jayla stood and stretched her stiff limbs. She looked toward the windows. Outside, the sky had shifted, clouds pulling apart like fingers opening. As they moved toward the elevator, Ms. Timble lagged a few steps behind. Jayla turned to Elijah. "Why today?" she asked. "Why not wait for the next hearing?" He didn't look at her right away. His voice was quiet. "I couldn't sleep last night. Something felt off. So I called the clerk's office again, asked if your name was on the docket. It was. I dropped everything and got on a bus." Jayla looked at him sideways. "From where?" "Trenton." A pause. "I lost my ride. Took 3 transfers." Jayla blinked. "You rode the bus 3 hours... for me?" 17 years, Elijah said. "I wasn't missing this one." The elevator doors opened with a chime. Inside, the mirrored walls caught their reflections. 2 people who looked like they belonged to each other, even if time had tried to erase the proof. Jayla leaned against the wall and watched him silently. After a while, she said, "You remember when I was little, and I used to hide under the sink when people knocked on the door?" Elijah looked at her, something blooming in his expression. "Yeah," he said. "You always brought your crayons, drew on the pipes." Her voice cracked just slightly. "Nobody else remembered that." "I did." He hesitated. "I remember all of it." When they stepped out, a caseworker's car waited at the curb. Jayla opened the back door, then turned to face Elijah. The wind caught her hoodie, flaring it like a cape. "I am not good at trusting people," she said. "You don't have to be yet," he replied. "Just don't stop trying." She nodded. Then, almost imperceptibly, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist. Not tightly, not long, but enough. Enough for now. By the time the official review hearing was scheduled, word had spread. Not in headlines or news tickers, but in whispers, in shared emails, in the tired corridors of family courtrooms across Camden County. A judge had been publicly challenged, a girl had spoken for herself, and a father had walked through fire to claim her. Now, the benches in courtroom 6B weren't just filled with bureaucrats and caseworkers. Social advocates had shown up. A few local pastors. Even a retired judge sat quietly in the back, arms crossed, observing. Judge Catherine Elderson presided again. But something was different. Her posture was still erect, her robe immaculate, but her voice no longer cut like it used to. There was a hesitance beneath it now, a measured carefulness that hadn't been there before. Jayla sat beside Elijah this time, not in the defendant's chair, but behind the petitioner's desk. A new pro bono attorney sat beside them, a sharp-eyed black woman named Kendra Moss, who specialized in reuniting fractured families. She had met Jayla only 3 days earlier and had already memorized her file. Elderson flipped through documents. Her face remained composed. "We are reviewing Mr. Elijah Watts's formal petition for custody of Jayla Monroe," she said aloud, "based on updated documentation, testimony, and supporting character statements." She tapped the folder. "I have reviewed the parole reports, all come back clean. Mr. Watts is employed, has secure housing, and, per Ms. Timble, has established consistent contact and commitment to his daughter since locating her." A flicker of tension passed through the court. Room Elderson paused, then her gaze landed on Jayla. "I understand you wish to speak again." Jayla stood, not stiff this time, not frozen, just steady. "I do," she said. Elderson gestured. "Go ahead." Jayla's voice was calm, but it carried. "I've been passed around like a file for most of my life. Every time I tried to explain myself, someone else spoke louder. Every time I cried, someone said I was being dramatic. Every time I stayed silent, they said I was cold." She glanced back at Elijah. "But when he spoke, you listened." The courtroom was quiet. "I'm not asking for pity," Jayla continued. "I'm asking for a chance. To live with someone who knows my name. My real name. Not the name they gave me when I was moved. Not the name they mumbled at check-in. Just Jayla Watts. His daughter." Elijah's eyes were glassy, but he didn't blink. "I know it won't be perfect," she added, "but I'm done surviving. I want to start living. With him." She sat down. Elderson's fingers twitched on the bench. The performance of neutrality was faltering. Her eyes dropped to the desk. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, unexpectedly, her voice cracked. "I have presided over hundreds of cases," she said, "and I have made difficult decisions. Often with limited information. Often with judgment." It was the closest thing she'd ever come to an admission. She looked up. "Mr. Watts, do you understand the responsibility you are taking on?" "Yes, ma'am." "This child has been through trauma." "Yes, ma'am." "You will need to attend family counseling, continue check-ins, and work with a support specialist." "I'll do whatever it takes." A pause. Then, "Custody is granted, effective immediately." The room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Jayla leaned into Elijah's shoulder, eyes wide, lips pressed together to hold back whatever trembled inside her. Kendra Moss smiled and reached for her briefcase. Elderson stood. "Court adjourned." But she didn't leave the bench. Instead, she turned, slowly, and looked at Jayla again. Not coldly, not condescendingly, just human. "I wish you well," she said quietly. Jayla didn't respond. She didn't have to. Sometimes silence was the clearest answer in the world. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through a long, gray stretch of sky. Jayla and Elijah walked down the steps side by side. No cameras, no parade, just freedom, and the start of something neither of them had names for yet. "I don't have a bed frame yet," Elijah admitted as they reached the sidewalk. "But I got a mattress. You can pick the sheets." Jayla smiled. "I like blue." They walked toward the bus stop, shoulders brushing. That night, Elijah laid an extra blanket on the twin mattress in the corner of his modest apartment. The place was small, just a one-bedroom with a kitchenette that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old wood. But it was clean, honest, earned. Jayla stood by the window, looking out over the street lamps and rust-red bricks of the neighborhood below. Her duffel bag sat unopened by the wall. "You hungry?" Elijah asked, loosening the collar of his shirt. "I got rice, eggs, might even have some hot sauce hiding in the fridge if we're lucky." She didn't answer right away. She was watching the world. "I used to picture this place," she said quietly. Elijah paused at the kitchen threshold. You did? Not like this exactly, she shrugged. I used to imagine it was bigger. Had like wood floors and a balcony and a neon sign that said Dad's house or something dumb like that. He chuckled. Sorry to disappoint. She smiled faintly. No, it's better. Elijah moved into the kitchen, opening the cabinets. Well, you're stuck with me now. Hope you like loud sports radio and burnt rice. I like quiet, she said. Then, after a pause, but I think I'll get used to the rest. They ate sitting on the floor, plates balanced on their knees. Jayla picked at her rice, not because she wasn't hungry, but because it felt surreal to be eating without someone watching over her shoulder like a warden. She was used to eating fast, hiding food, guarding it. Now there was only silence, broken occasionally by the hum of the refrigerator or the muffled bass of a car passing outside. I thought you might hate me, Elijah said suddenly. Jayla blinked. Why? For being gone, for not fighting louder. I did, she said, voice low. I hated you for a long time. Elijah nodded. Fair. But I hated a lot of people, she added, and you were the only one who came back. The room was quiet. Then Elijah whispered, I want to be better than what you remember, that's all. You already are, she said. They cleaned up in a quiet rhythm, two people learning each other's steps in a new kind of dance. Elijah set up a folding chair near the bed, pulled out a worn copy of Things Fall Apart, and handed it to her. I used to read to you from this, he said. You don't remember, do you? She shook her head but took the book. Maybe it'll come back. He nodded. One day at a time. That night, Jayla curled under the blanket on the floor mattress and stared at the ceiling, still afraid to sleep deeply. Still half expecting to wake up in a different house with new walls and new rules. But just before her eyes shut, Elijah's voice came from the chair, soft, steady, reading the first lines of the book. And for the first time in years, she slept without fear. Weeks passed. The court's ruling stood. Elijah took a second job at a warehouse across town. Jayla enrolled in a local charter school, her records finally stabilized under her new last name, Watts. She joined a writing club. Sent her first finished poem to a contest, won second place. They argued sometimes, about curfews, loud music, whose turn it was to wash dishes. But the arguments ended with talking, not silence. With mended threads, not frayed ones. And then one chilly Saturday morning, while they were painting her bedroom walls sky blue, Elijah asked, You ever want to visit your mom again? Jayla paused, roller dripping mid-stroke. I think about her, she admitted, but not yet. Elijah nodded. When you're ready. She turned and smiled at him, blue paint on her cheek. Thanks for not pushing. He looked at her, this girl who had once stood silent in a courtroom while strangers decided her fate, and now stood barefoot in his apartment, walls covered in handwritten quotes and drawings of suns and moons and staircases. You push flowers, he said, not people. Jayla laughed, then dipped her brush in paint and swiped a streak across his shirt. They chased each other around the room like two people who had never been torn apart. Later that night, Jayla sat at her desk by the window, writing a letter in her journal. Not to send, just to remember. Dear me, you made it. You're still scared sometimes, but it's not the same kind of scared. This time, you're afraid of losing something real, which means you finally have it. Keep going. Love, Jayla Watts. She smiled at the name, closed the journal, and turned out the light, the end.